right, so now let's see if we can match up a possible correlation coefficient value to a graph that could represent it. Now, the directions here say to do it as partners. We are obviously doing it on video here, so if you want to, again, look back at the previous page directions or the values of the correlation coefficient to remind yourself of what the correlation coefficient could mean, and then come back to this, that's fine. I recommend that you pause the video, try this yourself. There's 8 here that you have to match up, and then start the video again and see if your answers were correct. So go ahead and pause the video now. All right, let's come back and talk through each one of these problems here. So if it is a positive correlation, you're going to have a positive sloping line, and they're going to be perfectly lined up right along the line right here. So if they're all on the line and it's a positive sloping line, then that is going to be where you have an R value of positive 1. So this one right here matches up with A right here. Okay, so let's take a look at one that would be negative 1 here. So what lines up perfectly on a line and slopes in a negative direction? So F would be that one. R is equal to negative 1 here because it's a perfect, remember the coefficient goes between 1 and negative 1. If it lines up perfectly on a line, then it's either 1 or negative 1. We know this is negative 1 because it's sloping in a negative direction. So F is going to be the R equals negative 1. So that one is F. Okay. Maybe I'll go in order from the top here just to do this in a particular order. So R equals negative 0.95. So now that's sloping in a negative direction, and it's really close to negative 1. So that means it's going to be pretty linear, but in a negative direction. So if we look at all the examples, it looks like C would be that particular one. So this would be R is equal to negative 0.95. Because that is sloping in a negative direction and it's pretty linear. All right, number 3 is sloping in a negative direction. It's not quite as linear as the previous one, negative 0.74. It's still closer to negative 1 though. So you still should be somewhat of a pattern sloping in a negative direction. So it seems to me that this would have to be D right here, this one right here. There is a negative correlation there. It's generally negative, generally linear, sloping in a negative direction. So that one would be D. All right, number 4, R is equal to negative 0.06. Okay, so this is really close to 0. It's a negative slope for our line, but not a very steep negative slope. And there's not going to be a whole lot of pattern because this correlation coefficient is really close to 0. And the closer it is to 0 for a correlation coefficient, the less linear it is. So that one looks like it's going to be G. You can see you have a negative sloping line here, but there really isn't any pattern on this one. So a correlation coefficient of 0 means that, or negative 0.06 close to 0, not really much of a correlation. All right, number 5. I'm just going to write in negative, R equals negative 0.06. Number 5, you have a positive correlation coefficient, not super linear. It's not quite even a half here for number 5. So looking at something that's not very linear, but is sloping in a positive direction. To me, it seems like H would have to be this one because it's a very loose positive correlation there on that one. So that one would be H. Number 6, it's a little bit more linear than number 5 was, a little bit more than H, sloping in a positive direction. Still not super duper linear, but notice like this one down here, E seems to be a little bit more grouped together in a positive direction. So let's say E is that one. So R equals 0.65 on this one. Which leaves us with number 7, which is pretty close to 1. So it's going to be pretty linear, sloping in a positive direction. And of course, the only one we have left is B here. So hopefully that made sense as we were talking through those of how you would kind of reason through matching the correlation coefficient with the line and the linear model and the scatter plot.